Every person has experienced some kind of trauma in their life. But when people experience trauma, the vast majority of people cope with it. Coping is very different from healing, but these coping mechanisms give people the illusion that they're okay. This is compounded by the fact that society itself not only condones and supports coping, but also has a real blindness to trauma. The result is that we live in a society full of people who are traumatized but whom don't see that they have experienced trauma. A society full of people who need healing but who don't know that they need healing. In today's video, we're going to take an in-depth look at the main reasons why most people don't see and recognize their traumas. Let's start with why people don't see or recognize their traumas. After all, it may seem strange that we don't see or recognize our traumas, given that traumas are such a standout part of our lives. Well, there are several key reasons why this is the case. One, the first big issue begins with the faulty definition that people have of trauma. When most people think of trauma, they're thinking only of things that they judge as really big. Things like being sex trafficked or experiencing like a high-speed car accident in which you lose someone you love. But the reality is, trauma is any situation that causes you distress which is not resolved. This means that trauma is not only these things we judge as big and classically associate with the word trauma, it's also things like a baby being weaned and having no way to know why he was suddenly cut off from his source of contact, comfort, nourishment, and abundance. It's the chronic experiences over the course of a person's childhood where they were made to feel like they don't fit in or are not welcome. It is the pattern of a person, say, not having their individuality and authenticity recognized because they were expected to be exactly what their family expected and wanted them to be. It's the loss of the family cat. It's the emotional intimacy that was never given. It is every experience where we went into distress and that distress was never resolved. We simply adapted to it. Most people have no conscious awareness of the dramatic effect that every trauma had on their life, including the ones that they judge as little or don't even recognize as traumas. When a trauma happens, we make that painful thing that we have experienced mean something, and that in turn alters the way we think, the decisions we make, the choices that we choose, the things we do, the behavior we exhibit, our very life. 2, normalization. There's a reason why in cultures which practice ritual sacrifice, no one was mortified at the sight of someone being killed in a ceremony. Right? There's a reason that no one thought anything when in the 11th century, no one used forks. Why? Because forks were blasphemous. There's a reason why no one thought anything of a pregnant woman smoking and drinking alcohol in the 1950s. The reason for all of this is that it was normal. Human beings tend to acclimatize to and then accept whatever situation they find themselves in. This is even more true when we are children. We don't know any better. We don't know any different. Whatever we experience as common in our environment becomes our idea of normal. So what is normal? Normal is whatever conforms to a standard, is usual, typical, or expected. So the thing is, though, that normal is not a measure of health. This is why that famous quote by Krishnamurti was so good. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It's such an important thing to come to the awareness of. Normal can become a blinder through which we see the world. It can be a way of staying in denial, remaining unconscious, and never, and I mean never, being able to heal or progress. Many of the things that had a profound negative, maybe even positive effect on you, you may not even recognize because you saw them as normal. If you see something as normal, it's not going to stand out to you as anything of interest or anything notable. You may completely overlook it, but this tendency can go, in fact, much, much further than the human tendency to not realize that something is out of alignment when it is the norm. It can, in fact, serve as a negative coping mechanism as well. When we normalize something, we can avoid the pain that might be involved in seeing something as not right and not good. For example, imagine that in our childhood it was common and typical for both parents to be away from home all day working. Why? Because it's normal. We don't see the emotional neglect we suffered. By normalizing it, we don't see that emotional neglect had a profound effect on our psyche. For example, we don't see how it has led to the pattern of maybe selecting unavailable partners in our adult life and ending up so depressed and lonely that we are on psychiatric medications. Because it was Normal, we don't see how unhealthy our societal structure is, so we do nothing to change it. We don't have to see that our parents hurt us in any way, so we don't have to acknowledge any rupture between ourselves and them. We can follow in their footsteps, thus validating what they did with us, which, by the way, establishes closeness, which is absolutely critical for a social species. But the problem is, the effect is there. We just can't attribute it to a cause, much less the correct cause. In this same vein, something that goes hand in hand with normalization is minimization. To minimize something is to downplay the significance of it, and people do it all the time. When you use minimization against yourself, it's a form of self-deception. When you do it to avoid acknowledging and dealing with negative emotions and painful beliefs associated with them by reducing the severity of the impact and the importance of the events that gave rise to those emotions and beliefs. You do it to avoid interpersonal conflict. It allows us to rationalize and justify and negate. When it comes to normalization, our favorite way to minimize is through comparisons. Things like, I went through the usual stuff, unlike those other kids who came from alcoholic homes, or those other kids in countries that are working in sweatshops. Normalization makes the process of becoming aware of, acknowledging, and changing a pattern literally impossible. There's an expectation also that if something is normal, if everyone's doing it, or if it's just the way things are done, that it must be right or good. This tendency to equate what is normal with what is good or right can be very, and I mean very, very dangerous. There is also an expectation that if something is normal, it's somehow not going to have a negative effect on someone. Just because something is normal does not make it right or good, and just because something was or is the norm, does not mean the negative impact of it somehow doesn't exist. The things you experienced absolutely affected the trajectory of your life, regardless of whether they were common practice or normal or not. The things you would at face value write off as insignificant can in fact be the very traumas that are ruining your life today. 3, we learn to frame things in our own awareness the way that other people tell us we should or demonstrate that we should. If other people don't say that what we're experiencing is trauma and don't behave as if what we're experiencing is trauma, and even worse, if they outright invalidate that what we're experiencing is traumatic, we tend to adopt their way of seeing this. This can range all the way from a person adopting the constant narrative of, we have the best family, and therefore tuning out any experiences that are incongruent with that narrative, all the way to full-blown gaslighting and mind control abuse. We've already talked about normalization, right? Well, guess what? Normalization can also be used as a social control tactic that a person uses to desensitize another person to something that might cause distress in order to get them to accept it or agree to it. This is how the normalization of deviance, by the way, can come about. It might be tempting to think that normalization as a control tactic is something only sociopaths or deviants or abusers with victims do. It isn't. In fact, parents love to use this tactic to justify their own behavior. Many people confront their parents about certain things that occurred, only to hear their parents retort with things like, every parent did that. In fact, you got it so much better than most kids did. When we experience something as a trauma, but the way that someone else behaves invalidates that estimation, it causes us to doubt or, question our own estimation of reality. And many of us cope by simply adopting whatever external narrative is demonstrated to us. This is why you will hear so many people who grew up with their distress being met with the response, well, that's just the way it is, or it's just the way it was back then. Be the ones to respond to their own distress and other people's with, well, it is the way it is. 4, it can be scary to acknowledge trauma because of what acknowledging trauma can mean for us and for our lives. We live in a world where needing healing is still stigmatized. Society still puts pressure on everyone to be put together all the time, if not perfect. It's tragic. But for most people, seeing themselves as someone who needs healing means acknowledging that they're not perfect, that they're not all put together, that they're not good or right. This makes people feel bad about themselves. It makes them fear other people's judgment and feel like they are exposing themselves as weak and inferior. People also absolutely hate feeling powerless, and to admit that we need to heal means admitting that we were affected by something, that we can be hurt by something or someone else, and that we were. On top of this, most of us build a kind of stability of our lives on the narrative and on the beliefs about ourselves, other people, and the world. Guess what? Acknowledging trauma can completely destroy that narrative, as well as those beliefs. What this does is it throws us into the feeling of unsafety and instability. Of course, it can easily be argued that if a person's narrative were built on something real, right, then they wouldn't be in this situation. Therefore, the stability they perceived was actually false. We may have to accept things that are so painful and scary that we doubt our ability, quite frankly, to do so. Denying trauma can be a powerful way to put distance between yourself and an overwhelming experience. Thus, an attempt to avoid a reality collapse or a system overload. Acknowledging trauma can also disrupt our relationships. For example, if we acknowledge trauma that occurred within our family of origin, we may find ourselves running right into the experience that family systems are very resistant to change. We may end up being ostracized by our own family, having a really hard time having a normal Christmas dinner with everyone. We can face a whole host of social consequences as a result of acknowledging trauma. Or we may go down the road of acknowledging trauma only to discover, as a result of that process, that the current relationships that we have are not actually authentic to us or good for us. And so we may face a deep sense of aloneness and also fear that our entire social sphere must change. And this is extremely difficult for a social species, which a human being is. We are terrified of losing connection and coherence with the people in our lives. Acknowledging trauma has an uncanny way of changing things about our life. If we start to heal our trauma, it goes without saying that those things that stem from that trauma will also change. And people are terrified of, and therefore very resistant to change. 5. Memory of traumatic experiences are often suppressed. The subconscious mind takes over control of anything that interferes with the conscious mind, but there are times when the subconscious mind takes over things for the sake of survival, and this mechanism that benefits us in the short term can in fact harm us deeply and immensely in the long term. Okay, so I'll give you an example. If your parents got a divorce when you were young, you may have suppressed that memory of hiding underneath the porch, listening to them scream at each other and throw things at each other. And then, even the part of that memory where one of your parents was gone in the morning. You may have suppressed that, as well as the memory of having decided at that minute that it's dangerous to love anyone because you're going to lose them. If the pain you felt about this matter interfered with your life enough, the subconscious mind might own that memory and own that belief. You would then have no conscious awareness of your original experience and the belief associated with it. You would simply observe that the minute that you get too close or too intimate with someone, you pull away and end the relationship. As a grown person, you're only aware of the symptom. The root cause of that symptom, which is that memory, that traumatic experience, remains deeply buried in your subconscious mind. In this way, your subconscious mind takes over your thoughts and emotions. And when situations are extreme, it can take over entire memories that are a threat to your conscious mind. This is especially true when children grow up with attachment figures who are harmful to them in some way. The cognitive dissonance associated with living with the monster is so great that you actually could not go on living in the atmosphere of that much terror. So, by suppressing the memory of that interaction that you had with them, of the abuse, you maintain your attachment to the adult who is harming you and thus ensure your own survival. So, all this being said, the mechanism of suppression when it comes to memories is a big reason why many people don't see or recognize their traumas. 6, a lot of traumas are about what isn't there rather than about what is there. When we think of traumas, we think of bad things happening. We rarely ever think of things not happening that we needed to have happen. We rarely think about things like unmet needs, trauma that involves what wasn't done rather than what was done. But trauma that involves what isn't there rather than what is accounts for so much trauma in today's world. It is the underlying thing that is causing the vast majority, I would say, of problems for adults in today's world. It's the understanding that you didn't get. It's the protection that wasn't provided. It's the present and togetherness you didn't experience, so you were alone. It's the way you weren't valued. It's the unseen dysfunctional social dynamics that caused you to suffer as a child. This is so often why you may have no memory of anything that could cause you to be so not okay, and may even tell yourself that you must be mentally ill. If a person has never experienced something, they don't even know what the hell they're missing. This is especially the case when it comes to emotional neglect. And a person can have everything they would ever need on a physical level and more. They could be born into the richest family on earth and be completely neglected, deprived, abused, and damaged on an emotional level. People have a hard time imagining that what isn't there could be a huge source of trauma. But it works the same way with emotions that it does with the physical. If you take a little sapling tree and deprive it of enough sunlight, fail to give it adequate water, and put it in poor soil, what you will see is detrimental changes that happen to it, and it will eventually die, all because of what wasn't there. The same is true for people, but there are a great many factors that determine whether a physical human will thrive or not, than just food and water and shelter and all the good physical things they could need. And without these things, a person will be traumatized and will fail to thrive, but they won't see it. 7, people's coping mechanisms mask the need for healing. This is easy to see with classic coping mechanisms. For example, if a person uses denial to cope, they're going to walk around quite functional, but in a state of denial. But this denial is going to mask the reality of what has happened from their own mind and from onlookers. Or for example, say that a person uses workaholism to cope. If this person lives in a society that values career success, this person can simply absorb themselves in work, which is going to feel better than confronting the feelings that they're trying to escape through work, and no one is going to notice this dysfunction. Rather, they're going to commend this person for how hard of a worker they are. Coping mechanism and adaptations, right, mask the need for healing even better when it's related to the personality. People create adaptations to their personality to cope with trauma. These adaptations are designed to make a person safer. As a result, they will give people the impression of improvement. People mistake this for healing when it's not healing. I should say, they mistake it for I don't need to heal anything because I'm okay with something, when they're not. For example, let's imagine that a trauma a little girl experienced was the trauma of her femininity being rejected because her parents wanted a boy. She may cope with this by becoming a tomboy, dressing in boy clothes, playing with boys' toys, and playing a lot of sports. Acting strong, basically acting like what she imagines a boy is like. We can't say that this is healing. What would be healing is for her femininity to be embraced. Instead, her tomboy behavior is a coping mechanism she adopted to deal with the distress of her femininity being rejected. But coping in this way will give her the sensation of improvement and decreased pain. Why? Because she's likely to get a better reaction from her parents by trying to become more like what they wished they would have had. This little girl is also going to identify as a tomboy when she does this. We confuse ourselves with our coping mechanisms and adaptive behavior. This girl is likely to grow up seeing herself as more masculine. She won't see a need to heal from it though, because she will think that how she is just a reflection of who she really is, when who she really is far, far different. In this same vein, people really think their coping mechanisms and adaptations work for them, even when they don't. We see no need to change or heal what we think is working for us. Think of the boy who grew up in a society that values independence and shames people for dependencies. In order to avoid the social consequences, he is likely to become super hyper independent. He will think this independence is a good thing, and go on to profess the importance of independence, and go on possibly to shame other people for dependency. He sees no need to heal from this trauma around dependency because he thinks hyper-independence is a good thing. And he lives in a society that taught him this, and therefore they completely agree. There is no need to heal what a person thinks is good and is right, and especially what is working for them, even when it isn't. 8, people as well as society at large confuse healthy with functioning. Most people don't see the need to heal if they're able to function, i.e. able to maintain a job, able to be in social environments and act normal, able to complete a task, able to maintain self-care routines, etc. The reality is there's plenty of dysfunction that is still considered functional, and there are plenty of people who are able to function who are deeply traumatized and who need healing very, very badly. We cannot and should not use functionality as the barometer for whether someone is okay or not. We should never use functionality as the barometer for whether somebody is mentally and emotionally healthy. We should never use functionality as the barometer for whether a person needs healing or not. Alas, people do, and society does. 9. I shouldn't have to tell you this, I probably don't, but to generalize, people are really, really unaware and really, really unconscious. Most people have not dedicated themselves to the path of awakening, awareness, self-awareness, seeking truth, and seeing reality. It just isn't a priority for the vast majority of people. As a result, they tend to be closed-minded. They don't really think through things. They don't stop to consider cause and effect, much less ripple effects. They stay stuck in their subjective perspective to the degree that they don't consciously observe things, including themselves, and consciously analyze things. They don't question enough, nor do they question deeply enough. A lot of people prioritize feeling good over knowing the truth. Many people don't expose themselves to different thoughts, different experiences, different ways of doing things, which would in fact put the things that they have normalized into question. And even when someone does commit themselves to the path of awakening and awareness, it's a path of progression. It's a skill that one hones over time. Anyone who is on the path of awareness can tell you that there is so much that they keep becoming aware of, that they were completely ignorant to, no matter how many years they may have been at this whole self-awareness / awakening thing. But when a person is not dedicated to awareness, there is so much dysfunction and so much pain that is not even seen. There is so much that a person is totally ignorant to. By the way, this includes the fact that they need healing. It's time to destigmatize healing, especially given that all people need it, and given that unwanted experiences, including traumas, provide the fertile ground for personal expansion, and they're therefore a part of every person's life. And hopefully now you understand why most people don't know they need healing, even though they do. They really, really do. Have a good week.